They said the white German Shepherd was too dangerous to touch, but dangerous things do not cry like that when they think no one is listening. Before sunrise, the shelter hallway in Savannah, Georgia, feels colder than it should, the kind of cold that slips under doors and settles into concrete. Fluorescent lights buzz above the kennels, pale and tired, turning every shadow the color of old bone. The air smells of bleach, wet fur, metal bowls, and yesterday's rain still clinging to the coats of dogs who have learned not to expect much from morning. At the far end of the building, past the adoption rooms with painted paw prints on the walls, past the office where coffee burns in a glass pot, there is a narrow corridor marked staff only. That is where they keep Atlas. He is 5 years old, a white German Shepherd K9 with a coat that might have looked like fresh snow once, before dust, stress, and cage light dulled it to the color of winter clouds. His body is strong, broad through the chest, lean through the hips, every muscle carrying the memory of training, discipline, and commands no one gives him anymore. His ears stand sharp, but one trembles when footsteps pass. His amber eyes do not beg, not in daylight. In daylight, Atlas stays near the back wall of his kennel, silent and still, watching humans the way a wounded soldier watches a door that once opened to danger. On the front of his cage hangs a red warning card, laminated and clipped beneath his file number. Do not approach. High risk. Dangerous. The words are large enough for even visitors to read from several feet away, and that is how most people know him. Not by his name. Not by what he endured. Not by the nights he pressed his nose to the cold bars and listened to every other dog get walked, fed, comforted, chosen. They know him by the warning, by the story told in low voices, by the way staff members tighten their hands around leashes when they pass him. That morning, 2 shelter workers stand outside his kennel with a loop lead and a thick pair of gloves. Neither of them looks cruel. That almost makes it worse. One is young, barely 25, with freckles across her nose and fear tucked behind her professional calm. The other is older, heavy-set, quiet, holding a clipboard against his chest like it might protect him from the decision already written there. Atlas watches them without moving. His tail is low. His breathing is slow. Only the faint tapping of one back paw gives him away. Not aggression. Memory. We just need to move him to holding, the older man says, though his voice does not sound convinced. The young woman nods, swallowing once. Somewhere outside, a truck rolls past on the wet street, tires hissing through puddles. Somewhere closer, a terrier barks twice and then stops, as if the whole building is waiting. The kennel latch clicks. Atlas rises. Not fast. Not with a lunge. He simply stands, and both workers take one step back. That is the curse of being feared. Even your breathing becomes evidence. The loop slips through the bars. Atlas looks at it, then at the hands holding it. For 1 second, the great white dog seems less like a danger and more like something tired of being misunderstood. But fear moves quicker than mercy. The young worker whispers, "Easy, boy." Atlas flinches at the word easy, as if it has been used before by people who meant the opposite. The loop settles over his neck. He does not fight it. He lets them lead him out into the hallway, paws silent on the polished concrete, head lowered just enough to make his shoulders look heavier. The red warning card swings behind him on the cage door, still accusing him after he has left. As they guide him past the empty visitation room, the overhead lights flicker once. Atlas stops. His ears tilt toward the corner, where a child's old blue tennis ball has rolled beneath a bench, forgotten and dusty. For a breath, something soft crosses his face. A memory, maybe. A yard. A hand. A voice that once called him good. Then the older worker gives the leash a gentle pull, and the moment disappears. They continue down the corridor toward the rear holding area, where decisions are made quietly and paperwork speaks louder than hearts. That is when Atlas makes the sound. Not a bark. Not a growl. A small broken cry slips from his chest, so low it almost gets swallowed by the buzz of the lights. The young worker freezes. The older man looks away. Atlas lowers his head further, ashamed of the sound, as if even his pain has broken a rule. No one says anything. In shelters, people learn to survive by naming things correctly but feeling them from a distance. Intake. Evaluation. Incident report. Risk level. Final review. Words can make heartbreak easier to file. Atlas takes another step, then another, his white paws leaving faint damp marks behind him. Outside, Dawn begins to thin the dark over Savannah, touching the tops of live oaks and the old brick streets with gray light. Inside, the dog they called Too Dangerous walks toward a room he does not understand, surrounded by people who are not evil, only afraid. And fear, when given a clipboard, can look a lot like justice. At the end of the hall, Atlas stops again. This time, he turns his head toward the front lobby, toward a sound no one else has heard yet. The soft tap of a white cane against tile, steady and careful, coming closer through the morning quiet. The white cane touched the lobby tile with a sound so small it should not have changed anything. Tap, pause, tap, pause. Yet every dog in the front kennels seemed to hear it differently. Their barking softened, then scattered into restless whines. The receptionist looked up from the computer. The young worker holding Atlas by the lead turned her head toward the lobby. Even Atlas, halfway down the restricted corridor with the red warning still hanging behind him like a sentence, stood completely still. Staff Sergeant Isaiah Brooks stepped through the front door with his left hand wrapped around the handle of his cane and his right hand resting lightly on his niece Maya's shoulder. He was 42 years old, tall, broad through the chest, with the careful posture of a man who had learned balance the hard way. His skin was deep brown, warm against the faded olive jacket he wore over a plain gray shirt. The jacket was military issue, old but clean, with one sleeve patched near the elbow and the faint outline of where a name tape had once been removed. His eyes were open but unfocused, dark and still, looking past the room rather than at it. A thin scar crossed near his right brow, pale against his skin, not dramatic, just present, like a line left by a storm that had moved on but never truly gone. Maya walked beside him, 12 years old, small for her age, with braids tied back in blue beads that clicked softly whenever she turned her head. She had the careful seriousness of a child who had spent too much time around hospitals and adults speaking gently in hallways. In one hand, she carried a folded brochure from the County Veterans Center. In the other, she clutched the strap of a backpack with a cartoon keychain dangling from it. Front desk is about 15 feet ahead. Uncle Isaiah, she said softly. 2 people waiting. Chairs on your right. Isaiah nodded once. Thank you, ma'am. Maya smiled despite herself. He always called her ma'am when he wanted her to stop worrying. The receptionist stood quickly. Good morning. You must be Mr. Brooks. Isaiah is fine, he said. His voice was low, calm, with a southern warmth that made even ordinary words feel considered. We called about the service dog evaluation. Yes, sir. Dr. Carter left notes for us. We have a few calmer dogs who might be a good match for mobility support and companionship. Isaiah tilted his head slightly, listening past her voice. He heard the hum of the vending machine near the wall, the scratch of claws in a nearby kennel, the faint drip of water from a mop bucket somewhere behind the counter. He heard a beagle panting with excitement, a Labrador's tail thumping against plastic, a nervous little dog turning circles in its run. But beneath all of that, from far down the hall, he heard the sound again. Not loud, not meant to be heard. A breath caught behind a locked door. A quiet cry swallowed before it could become hope. Isaiah's fingers tightened around the cane. Maya noticed. Uncle Isaiah? He did not answer right away. The receptionist continued speaking, explaining forms, adoption counseling, adjustment periods, but the words seemed to pass around him like wind around a stone. Isaiah turned his face toward the restricted corridor. Who is back there? The receptionist stopped. That area is not open to the public. I did not ask if it was open. His tone remained gentle. That made it harder to dismiss. I asked who was back there. Behind the counter, a door opened, and Warden Blake Harlan stepped into the lobby carrying a folder under one arm. He was in his late 50s, square-jawed, neatly dressed, with silver hair combed back and the exhausted confidence of a man who had made too many hard calls to explain each one. Mr. Brooks, he said. Blake Harlan. I run the facility. We appreciate your service. Isaiah's face did not change. Thank you. Harlan glanced toward the corridor, then back to him. The animal you are hearing is not available. Animal has a name? A small silence followed. Atlas, Harlan said. White German Shepherd. Former working dog. Failed multiple placements. He is under review. Maya looked toward the hall, curiosity and concern mixing in her face. Is he sick? Harlan chose his words carefully. He is unpredictable. From the corridor, Atlas gave another low, broken sound. The young worker holding him shifted her weight, uneasy. Isaiah heard the chain move. He heard nails press against concrete. He heard a dog trying not to tremble. In his mind, another hallway opened, one half a world away, filled with dust and alarms and men calling through smoke. He had been younger then, sighted then, certain then, before the blast took the light and left him with a world built from sound, scent, touch, and memory. People thought blindness was darkness. It was not. Darkness was what came after everyone stopped calling your name. Isaiah took one slow step toward the corridor. Harlan moved in front of him. Sir, I cannot allow that. I am not asking to touch him. That dog has a serious history. Most of us do. The words landed softly, but no one in the lobby moved. Maya looked up at her uncle, seeing something change in his face, not anger, not pity, something older than both. Isaiah turned his head toward the far hall again. Atlas stood there, white coat dull beneath the fluorescent light, lead loose around his neck, amber eyes fixed on the blind man he had never met. For the first time that morning, his breathing changed. Not calmer, not yet, but listening. Isaiah lowered his cane until the tip rested flat against the tile. Maya, he said quietly, tell me what you see. She swallowed. Big dog. White fur. He looked scared, but he is standing real still. Isaiah nodded. That is what I thought. Harlan sighed. Mr. Brooks, with respect, you cannot see what he is capable of. Isaiah turned his blind eyes toward the man's voice. No, he said, but I can hear what you missed. Isaiah stepped cautiously toward the end of the hall, cane tip brushing against the floor with deliberate rhythm. The faint echo of his steps merged with the muted hum of fluorescent lights and the soft shuffling of the shelter staff, creating a quiet rhythm that filled the space between them. Atlas remained still, ears twitching, chest rising and falling with shallow, measured breaths. Isaiah paused, listening not to the room, but to the dog, allowing the subtle vibrations of Atlas's presence to settle into his awareness. Maya stepped close, hand lightly on her uncle's arm, sensing the tension in the air, yet keeping quiet. Isaiah spoke softly, almost to himself. Show me where you are, boy. Let me know you are still here. The sound of Atlas's claws tapping faintly against concrete responded in kind, as if affirming the silent connection. Slowly, the dog took a tentative step forward, muscles coiled yet controlled, tail low but not tucked, eyes wide and alert, scanning for threat, but finding none in the calm of Isaiah's posture. Isaiah took another step, guided by sound and memory, extending his hand toward the corridor as if reaching through the invisible walls that separated them. He could feel the air shift subtly, a vibration that suggested movement ahead. Atlas shifted too, one paw stepping carefully, his body tense but willing to approach the blind man who did not recoil, who did not demand compliance, who merely waited with patience honed from years of military discipline and adaptation. The young worker holding the leash allowed it to slacken, watching the exchange unfold with an understanding that the unfolding trust was fragile, yet tangible. Isaiah whispered, I hear you. I know you are here. The words were not commands. They were an invitation. A signal that there was no need to prove anything, no need for posture or show, only presence and acknowledgement. The subtle intake of breath from Atlas signaled recognition, not of the words, but of the calm energy, the respect embedded in tone and pause. The distant drip of a faucet somewhere in the back of the shelter, the faint rustle of paper from Harlan's folder, even the hum of the ventilation merged into the background as Atlas focused, listening, weighing, calculating, deciding. He inched closer, each step measured, deliberate, the weight of his body pressing faint impressions into the polished concrete. Isaiah's head tilted slightly, sensing the minor shifts in air pressure, the warmth radiating faintly from the animal, the subtle shift in the soundscape that told him the dog was moving, cautiously, toward him. Maya's hand moved to his shoulder instinctively, a quiet reassurance, but Isaiah did not flinch. Atlas paused halfway, ears flicking toward a distant sound, then toward the soft cadence of Isaiah's voice, then back to the blind man, weighing options, sensing the absence of threat, the presence of understanding. A second later, Atlas took another step, closer now, nose lowered slightly, tail still low, eyes focused, reading intention, trust forming with each measured movement. Isaiah felt the air around him change, as if something long dormant stirred in response to the quiet patience offered. The dog's chest heaved as he approached, and Isaiah extended a hand, moving slowly, allowing Atlas to determine distance, to establish comfort. For a long moment, time stretched, a single breath connecting two beings who communicated not through sight or command, but through presence, acknowledgement, and the understanding that here, at last, someone was listening. The hallway seemed to fade, leaving only the subtle rhythm of breathing, the faint tap of claws, and the awareness that the barrier between fear and trust was beginning to dissolve. Atlas paused just out of reach, nose twitching, eyes bright with cautious curiosity, and Isaiah whispered again, "You do not have to be afraid anymore." The sound of his own voice, calm and steady, seemed to ripple through the corridor. Atlas took a final step, body tense, chest rising and falling with effort, and rested his front paws lightly on the edge of the lead, acknowledging the invitation without breaking the silent agreement. The space between them was now minimal, the dog's focus entirely on the presence of the man who could not see him, and yet who understood more than anyone else could. Isaiah shifted slightly, cane held loosely, sensing the trust forming as Atlas breathed softly, the amber eyes meeting the unseen gaze, a quiet negotiation of acceptance and hope. Maya exhaled, the tension in her shoulders loosening just slightly as she observed the first true connection forming. The corridor remained empty of all else, the shelter sounds fading into background noise, leaving only the subtle symphony of careful movement, awareness, and the first fragile steps toward understanding between man and dog who had both known waiting, both known misjudgment, and both now sensing the beginning of a bond that might yet transform the morning. Isaiah remained still as Atlas's paws touched the floor of the corridor, the faint sound of claws clicking against concrete carrying more weight than the footsteps of any human. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and wet fur, a combination that had become almost invisible to most, but to Isaiah it spoke of stress, routine, and the presence of life waiting for attention. He let the moment stretch, allowing the dog to settle into the rhythm of his calm presence, breathing in sync with the faint vibrations of Atlas's chest. Maya shifted slightly beside him, her small fingers brushing against his jacket, a silent reassurance that they were together, moving slowly through a place that had always felt rigid and unyielding to creatures like Atlas. The white German shepherd hesitated, ears flicking toward the distant sounds of the shelter, the gentle hum of the water fountain, the soft thump of another dog settling in its kennel, the shuffle of a staff member moving papers across a desk, and then back toward the blind man whose presence seemed to fill the hall with an invisible warmth. Isaiah extended his hand slowly, palm open, fingers slightly apart, offering Atlas the choice to approach, to make contact on his own terms. The dog inhaled deeply, amber eyes bright, and took a careful step forward, placing one massive paw near the edge of Isaiah's outstretched hand, testing the trust, the intent behind the voice that spoke only in low, deliberate tones. The subtle shift in Atlas's posture, the way his head tilted slightly and his tail remained low but relaxed, signaled a tentative willingness to engage, to accept the presence of someone who had come not to command, not to control, but to listen. Isaiah's breathing remained slow, measured, a quiet metronome against the background of the shelter's life, and the dog responded. Each exhale and inhalation a quiet conversation of recognition, understanding, and fragile trust. Maya's eyes followed every subtle motion, the faint rise and fall of Atlas's shoulders, the way his ears pricked and flicked to her uncle's voice, the minute adjustments in his stance that communicated hesitation and curiosity in equal measure. Staff members nearby watched without interference, aware that this was a moment not to be rushed, a delicate unfolding that required patience, observation, and respect for the unspoken bond forming in real time. Isaiah took another step, guided by sound and memory, allowing his body to communicate calm and assurance, letting Atlas feel the stability and consistency of his presence. The corridor seemed to contract around them, the air thick with anticipation, yet filled with a gentle quiet that invited connection rather than confrontation. Atlas moved another step, placing both front paws lightly on the ground closer to Isaiah, chest heaving, ears attuned to every subtle vibration of voice and motion, and the small, almost imperceptible whine that had been swallowed in the early morning became a little clearer, a fragile acknowledgement of recognition and cautious engagement. Isaiah's hand remained steady, open, palms slightly lowered, allowing the dog to determine distance and proximity. Atlas shifted his weight, the muscles along his back rippling under white fur, testing the comfort and safety of this new presence. Maya exhaled softly, sensing the tension in the hall ease slightly, the first real movement toward a connection that had been absent for so long. The hum of fluorescent lights, the distant taps of other dogs, the faint rattle of the water fountain receded into the background as Atlas focused entirely on the unseen man, whose calm confidence offered a safe space to exist without judgment or threat. Isaiah whispered gently, "It is okay. You can come." The words carried no command, only acknowledgement, a promise that the dog's past would not define this encounter, that it was safe to take the next step. Atlas lowered his head slightly, amber eyes fixed, ears attentive, and stepped fully into the span of Isaiah's reach, chest rising and falling as if measuring every sound, every breath, every subtle cue. Isaiah shifted his weight again, sensing the alignment of trust solidifying, the fragile bridge between fear and acceptance growing stronger with each passing second. The corridor, normally austere and cold, seemed to soften, holding only the quiet dance of two souls discovering understanding, the subtle interchange of presence, patience, and silent affirmation that neither needed to dominate, only to exist together, sharing a first cautious connection in a world that had often misunderstood them both. Isaiah remained motionless as Atlas settled his front paws lightly onto the concrete, the slight warmth of his body brushing the edge of Isaiah's hand, an unspoken acknowledgement that this space was safe for now. The shelter corridor felt unusually quiet, filled only with the subtle symphony of distant hums, muffled footsteps, and the soft breathing of a dog cautiously exploring trust. Atlas's amber eyes held focus, scanning Isaiah for cues, and for the first time that morning, Isaiah felt the weight of his blindness shift into something more than limitation. It became attunement. He sensed Atlas's hesitation, the pause between each careful step, the subtle flex of muscles, and the slight quiver along the spine as the dog weighed the unseen world. Maya stayed close, her small hand brushing Isaiah's jacket as if to anchor him, as if reminding him that he was not alone in this space. "It is all right," Isaiah whispered, voice steady and low, carrying both reassurance and quiet invitation. The words were not command, but presence, a bridge over the tension that had coiled in Atlas's body for years. Slowly, Atlas lowered his head, the movement deliberate, sniffing the air, the faint metallic scent of the leash mixing with the warm, steady presence of Isaiah. Another step brought him closer, paws barely making a sound on the polished floor, each measured motion an act of courage in its own right. Isaiah felt the subtle change in air pressure as Atlas drew near, the faint exhale of a breath, the almost imperceptible shift of weight from one paw to another, and recognized it as trust being extended cautiously, slowly, yet undeniably. The corridor's fluorescent lights hummed quietly above them, casting soft, cool illumination across the white fur and highlighting the faint lines of stress and wear on Atlas's frame, the subtle scars from past encounters that spoke of misunderstanding and misjudgment, yet also resilience. Isaiah adjusted his stance slightly, allowing the blind guidance of memory and touch to dictate his movements, opening space with his body for Atlas to explore without fear. The dog paused, ears flicking toward distant sounds of other kennels, a soft rustle of paper, the faint drip from a water fountain, yet his focus remained anchored to the unseen presence before him. Another gentle step, paw connecting with the ground, weight shifting, and Atlas was within reach. Isaiah extended both hands slightly, not to grab, not to command, but to offer support, presence, a point of contact if Atlas chose to make it. Atlas hesitated, nose twitching, breath shallow, amber eyes locking in on Isaiah's calm form. Then, ever so slowly, he rested one massive paw against Isaiah's leg, testing the solidity, the safety, the assurance that he would not be judged or forced. Isaiah felt the subtle vibration of the dog's chest against him, a rhythm aligning faintly with his own breathing, and whispered, "You are safe here. You are seen." The words seemed to resonate through the hall, carrying past fluorescent light and concrete, into the intangible space between fear and acceptance. Maya exhaled quietly, the tension easing, sensing the first true thread of connection forming between a man and a dog both familiar with abandonment and mistrust. Atlas shifted his weight, chest rising and falling, placing both front paws fully within reach of Isaiah, the moment stretching, delicate, charged with the unspoken understanding that past judgments no longer held sway. The subtle tapping of the cane on the tile provided a grounding rhythm, a quiet metronome anchoring both of them as the dog explored the boundaries of trust with care, each movement deliberate, each breath measured, each glance a question and a tentative answer. Isaiah lowered his hand slightly, allowing Atlas to step closer, to sniff, to assess, to determine that this man would not retreat, would not flinch, would not impose, only acknowledge. The dog's ears pricked, tail relaxed slightly, and the faintest whine escaped his chest, not of fear, but of recognition and tentative acceptance. Isaiah responded with a soft hum, a low affirmation of presence, patience, and understanding. The corridor seemed to recede, leaving only the two of them, a quiet dialogue of breath, presence, and cautious trust building in real time. Each step Atlas took was careful, deliberate, but filled with an emerging sense of safety, the first morning light filtering faintly through the windows lending a subtle warmth to white fur dulled by confinement. Maya watched, holding her breath, sensing the profound simplicity of the moment, the silent conversation unfolding, knowing that they had crossed an invisible threshold from caution to recognition, from fear to tentative companionship, and that in this quiet morning corridor, trust had begun its slow, deliberate work. Dr. Emily Carter had been standing near the side door long enough to see what fear could not explain. She was 38 years old, with dark hair pulled into a loose knot and a tired blue clinic coat dusted with white fur along the sleeves. Most mornings, her work moved by numbers and needs: temperature, weight, hydration, medication, behavior notes. But that morning, as Atlas stood close to Isaiah Brooks with his massive white head lowered and his breath softening inch by inch, numbers felt like a poor language for what was happening in the hall. Blake Harlan cleared his throat behind her, the folder still pressed beneath his arm. "That is enough," he said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. Atlas's ears flicked toward him. His body tightened, not with anger, but with the old reflex of a creature who had learned that human voices could change the weather. Isaiah felt the shift before anyone named it. The warmth near his hand pulled back half an inch. The breathing changed. The trust, still new and fragile, trembled like a candle near an open door. Isaiah did not reach for Atlas. He simply lowered his voice. "Stay with me, boy." Atlas froze. 1 second. 2. Then he stayed. Emily saw it. So did Maya. Even Harlan saw it, though his mouth tightened like the truth had inconvenienced him. "Mr. Harlan," Emily said softly, "we should talk in my office." Harlan looked at her. "Not now." "Now," she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Isaiah turned his head toward her voice. "Dr. Carter?" "Yes, sir." Her throat moved as she swallowed. "There is something about Atlas's file you should know." The hallway changed after that. Not visibly. The lights still buzzed. The kennels still carried the smell of bleach and wet blankets. Somewhere near the front, a small dog scratched at a plastic door. But the people inside that corridor knew they had stepped closer to the part of the story no one had wanted to touch. Emily led them into a small examination room with pale green walls, a metal table, and a window facing the fenced yard behind the shelter. The morning outside was turning silver over the live oaks, Spanish moss hanging from the branches like old prayers. Atlas was not brought inside. Not yet. He remained in the corridor with the young worker, calm but watchful, eyes fixed on the door where Isaiah had gone. Isaiah sat in the chair nearest the wall. Maya stood beside him. Harlan stayed by the counter, arms folded. Emily opened a locked drawer and took out a thin file, not the thick public record with red stamps and behavior summaries, but a smaller folder with a cracked label and a storage drive taped inside. "Atlas came to us 14 months ago," she said. Before that, he was with a private training program outside Macon. Search and rescue, mobility support, some protection work, but mostly scent and response training. I was told he failed out because of aggression, Isaiah said. Emily looked down at the folder. That is what the summary says. Harlan's jaw tightened. Because that is what was reported. Emily turned toward him. Reported is not always the same as true. The room fell quiet. Isaiah did not move. He had heard that kind of silence before, in military briefings where the clean version sat on paper while the real version waited in the faces of the men who had been there. Emily plugged the storage drive into the old desktop computer on the counter. The monitor flickered. Audio crackled from the small speaker, thin and distorted. Maya leaned closer to Isaiah, and he placed one hand gently over hers. The recording began with wind, voices, dogs barking in the distance, and a man laughing too loudly near a training yard. Then came Atlas's bark. Sharp, controlled, not wild. A warning. Emily kept her eyes on the screen. This was from a body camera worn by an assistant trainer. It was never included in the public review. Harlan said nothing. The audio continued. A younger voice, nervous, said, "Sir, please step back from the kennel gate." Another voice answered, smooth and impatient, "I paid for this program. I will stand where I want." Atlas barked again. Then there was the sound of metal rattling, hurried footsteps, a child crying somewhere nearby, and the deep, commanding voice of a trainer saying, "Atlas, hold." Isaiah's face changed at the word hold. Not visibly to everyone, but Maya saw his fingers press into the arm of the chair. Emily stopped the audio before it went further. There was a boy visiting with a donor group that day, 10 years old. He wandered too close to an unsecured equipment area. Atlas blocked the gate. He did exactly what he was trained to do. He placed himself between the child and danger. No one was seriously hurt. But the donor said Atlas lunged without cause. Isaiah's voice was quiet, and the donor mattered more than the dog. Emily looked at Harlan, then back at the file. The donor funded half the shelter expansion last year. Harlan exhaled sharply. It was not that simple. Isaiah turned his blind eyes toward him. It usually is when the powerless are the ones paying. No one answered. Outside the room, Atlas gave one soft whine, not loud, not demanding, just a thread of sound slipping beneath the door. Isaiah turned toward it immediately. The dog had heard his voice and answered. Emily's eyes filled, though she blinked the emotion back before it fell. Atlas was labeled unstable after that. Every placement after him was handled like a warning instead of a chance. People approached him afraid. He reacted afraid. Then they wrote down dangerous. Maya whispered, "That is not fair." Harlan looked tired then, older than he had in the lobby. Fair does not always keep people safe. Isaiah stood slowly, one hand finding his cane. "No," he said, "but fear does not always tell the truth." He moved toward the door, guided by the sound of Atlas breathing on the other side. When Emily opened it, the white German shepherd was sitting in the hall, straight-backed, silent, watching. The moment Isaiah stepped out, Atlas lowered his head and pressed his nose lightly against the blind man's hand, not asking to be saved, not yet, but asking one question no file had ever answered. "Are you still here?" Isaiah rested his palm against the dog's warm muzzle. "Yes," he whispered. "I am still here." Richard Vale arrived just after 10 o'clock, when the morning had warmed enough to turn the rain on the sidewalks into a faint shine. His black sedan pulled into the reserved space near the front entrance with a quiet confidence that made people look before they knew why. Through the lobby windows, Maya saw him first. A tall man in a navy suit, silver tie, polished shoes, and sunglasses too dark for a cloudy day. He stepped out slowly, checking his watch as if the building had already wasted his time. The receptionist straightened at her desk. Blake Harlan's face changed before the door even opened, not into fear exactly, but into the careful expression people wear around money. Isaiah noticed the shift without seeing it. The air in the lobby tightened. Papers stopped moving. Conversations dropped to whispers. Even Atlas, waiting beside Isaiah near the restricted hallway with a loose training lead clipped to his collar, lifted his head. His ears went forward. His body turned still in a way that did not feel peaceful. Richard Vale entered carrying the smell of expensive cologne and cold rain. "Blake," he said, removing his sunglasses. His voice was smooth, practiced, and empty of warmth. "I was told this situation was being handled this morning." Harlan stepped forward. Mr. Vale, we are reviewing some new information. Richard's eyes moved past him and landed on Atlas. For one brief second, the room did not breathe. Atlas's tail lowered. The white fur along his shoulders rose slightly. Not high, not wild. Just enough to show that memory had entered the room before understanding could catch up. A sound came from deep in his chest, but it was not a growl. It was smaller, rougher, wounded by recognition. Isaiah heard it and placed his hand gently near the dog's neck, not restraining him, only reminding him that he was not alone. Easy, Isaiah whispered, then corrected himself softly, as if remembering how that word could hurt. I am here. Atlas leaned half an inch toward him. Richard frowned. Why is that dog out of containment? Emily Carter stepped from the hallway, holding the smaller file against her chest. Because he has shown no unsafe behavior with Mr. Brooks. Richard gave a short laugh. That animal has a documented history. Isaiah turned his head toward the voice. So do I. Richard glanced at him for the first time. His gaze passed over the cane, the dark glasses tucked in Isaiah's jacket pocket, the scar near his brow, the old Marine coat. And you are Isaiah Brooks. This does not concern you, Mr. Brooks. Maya stiffened, but Isaiah stayed calm. Funny thing about pain, he said. It concerns whoever hears it. The lobby went silent again. Outside, a delivery truck passed, its brakes sighing in the street. Inside, Atlas stared at Richard Vale with the fixed focus of a dog remembering a gate, a yard, a command, a child crying, and a man who smelled like sharp cologne and anger hidden behind clean clothes. Richard turned back to Harlan. I have supported this shelter for years. I will not have my name dragged through some emotional misunderstanding over an unstable animal. Emily's voice was quiet but firm. The body camera recording shows Atlas responded to a safety risk. He did not act without cause. That recording was inconclusive. It was buried. Harlan looked between them, his face pale beneath the fluorescent light. Richard's expression hardened. Dr. Carter, I would choose your next words carefully. Isaiah heard the warning in it. Not loud, not crude, just polished enough to pass as civility. He had known officers like that, contractors like that, men who never raised their voices because others had already learned to step back. Atlas heard it too. The dog's breathing grew quick, shallow. His paws shifted against the tile. He did not move toward Richard. He moved slightly behind Isaiah, as if the blind man had become the first safe wall he had ever known. That was when Maya saw the truth no file had made clear. He is scared of you, she said. Her voice was small, but it carried. Richard looked down at her. Young lady, you do not know what you are talking about. Maya took Isaiah's sleeve in one hand, but she did not look away. I know what scared looks like. Emily stepped closer to Atlas. Maya, stay by your uncle. Harlan rubbed a hand over his face. Everyone, let us slow down. Richard pointed toward the back hall. There is nothing to slow down. You have a policy for dogs with bite histories. Follow it. Atlas let out another sound then, a thin, broken whine that slipped through the room and found Isaiah like a hand in the dark. It was not the sound of a dangerous animal. It was the sound of a soul being forced to stand in front of the person who had helped turn its truth into a warning label. Isaiah lowered himself slowly to one knee. The movement was careful, deliberate, and the whole lobby seemed to lean toward him. He did not face Richard. He faced Atlas. Listen to me, he said softly. You are not back there anymore. Atlas's amber eyes flicked to Isaiah's face. You are right here, in this room, with me. The dog's breathing hitched. And nobody gets to decide who you are just because they were louder when the story was written. For a moment, the only sound was the buzz of the lights and the distant barking from the adoption wing. Then Atlas stepped forward, not toward Richard, but toward Isaiah. He pressed his head against the Marine's chest, heavy and trembling, and Isaiah wrapped one arm around him with the quiet certainty of someone holding a fellow survivor above deep water. Richard looked away first. Emily saw it. Harlan saw it. Maya saw it and wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand. But Isaiah only lowered his chin toward the white fur and whispered, There you are, boy. There you are. The moment did not last long. Moments like that rarely do. They arrive quietly, like grace. Then the world remembers its paperwork. Richard Vale stepped back from the center of the lobby, his jaw tight, his eyes moving from Isaiah's arm around Atlas to the faces watching him. This is sentimental theater, he said. Blake, you know your liability. You know what happens if that dog leaves this facility and something goes wrong. Harlan did not answer immediately. The folder in his hand looked heavier than paper. Emily stood near the examination room door, her face pale but steady. Maya kept one hand on Isaiah's shoulder, her other hand curled around the strap of her backpack. Atlas remained pressed against Isaiah's chest, breathing hard but staying still, as if some part of him understood that stillness was the only language the room would not twist against him. Then, from somewhere above the back hallway, a sharp electronic chirp cut through the shelter. Once, twice, a red light began flashing near the ceiling. The fire alarm. For half a second, no one moved, because people never believe the first warning. Then the alarm screamed fully, loud enough to rattle the metal bowls in the kennels. Dogs erupted into frantic barking. The lobby filled with overlapping voices, chairs scraping, phones being grabbed, doors opening too fast. Emily turned toward the rear corridor. The kennel wing. A thin gray haze slid under the staff door, not thick, but wrong, carrying the bitter smell of overheated plastic. Harlan swore under his breath and moved toward the control panel. Everyone out front, he called. Now, use the main exit. Richard was already backing toward the door. The receptionist reached for the emergency binder. Maya grabbed Isaiah's hand. Uncle Isaiah, we need to go. Isaiah stood, one hand finding his cane, the other brushing Atlas's collar. The alarm swallowed sound, turning the building into a storm of metal and panic. For a blind man, panic was not just fear. It was the world losing its edges. The steady map Isaiah carried in his mind broke apart beneath the siren, beneath barking, beneath hurried feet. The front door was somewhere ahead. Maya was beside him. Atlas was at his left. He took one step, then another, but a staff member rushed past with a crate, bumping the cane from its path. The cane struck a chair leg and slid sideways across the tile. Isaiah reached for it, but Maya had turned at Emily's shout. Maya, wait outside, Emily called. I need the side gate opened. Maya hesitated only a second, then ran toward the front with the receptionist, thinking Isaiah was behind her. He was not. The smoke from the rear hall thickened slightly, drifting into the lobby in low bands. Not flames, not chaos, just enough confusion to steal direction. Isaiah turned toward where he thought the exit was, but the alarm bounced off the walls and lied to him. His shoulder struck the corner of the reception desk. He caught himself, one hand searching empty air. Maya. No answer reached him through the noise. Atlas heard him. The white German shepherd lifted his head, every line of fear in his body sharpening into purpose. The same dog who had trembled before Richard Vale now changed in a way so quiet it almost looked holy. His ears locked on Isaiah's voice. His nose worked once through the smoke. Then he moved. The young worker had dropped the end of his lead in the confusion, and Atlas dragged it behind him as he crossed the lobby. He did not bolt. He did not bark wildly. He went straight to Isaiah, pressed his body against the Marine's leg, and pushed firmly. Isaiah froze. A breath passed between them. Atlas. The dog pushed again, then took the loose end of Isaiah's jacket sleeve gently in his mouth, not biting, guiding. Isaiah understood. All right, he whispered, coughing once. I am with you. Atlas stepped forward, slow enough for Isaiah to follow, steady enough to become a living compass. One step. Stop. Another step. Stop. Isaiah placed his hand lightly over the dog's back, feeling muscle, warmth, direction. The alarm screamed above them, but beneath it he found a new rhythm. Atlas breathing, Atlas moving, Atlas choosing him. They reached the front door as Emily rushed past carrying a small carrier. Maya was outside on the wet sidewalk, turning in circles, her face breaking when she saw them. Uncle Isaiah. Atlas guided him across the threshold into the damp Georgia air. Morning light washed over them, pale and trembling. But before anyone could breathe relief, Atlas pulled away. Isaiah felt the motion and tightened his hand too late. Atlas, wait. The dog turned back toward the building. From the side hallway came Maya's voice again, not outside now, but echoed from near the clinic wing. Dr. Carter, the gate is stuck. The child had run to help and become trapped behind the side door when it jammed. Emily spun around, horrified. Harlan shouted for the fire department, but Atlas was already moving. He ran back through the front entrance, low beneath the smoke, following Maya's scent past the reception desk and down the side corridor where the air stung with heat and alarm. He found her near the clinic gate, coughing into her sleeve, eyes wide but brave. The latch was caught where an old crate had shifted against it. Atlas pushed his shoulder into the crate. It scraped across the floor an inch, then another. Maya pulled the gate. It opened. "Good boy," she cried, and the words seemed to reach every wounded place in him. Atlas turned, nudged her forward, and stayed against her side until she stumbled into the lobby and out through the front doors. When they emerged, the sidewalk fell silent except for the alarm behind them and the distant sirens drawing closer. Maya wrapped both arms around Isaiah. Emily covered her mouth. Harlan stared at Atlas as if seeing him for the first time. The white German shepherd stood between the blind Marine and the smoking shelter doors, chest heaving, fur streaked with gray, eyes clear. No one called him dangerous then. No one found the word. By the time the fire department arrived, the danger had already begun to fade into steam, sirens, and the sharp, clean spray of water against brick. It had been a small electrical fire in the rear utility room, contained before it could take the shelter, but fear never measures itself by size. Fear measures itself by what almost happened. Dogs were carried to the fenced yard in crates and blankets. Staff members stood in wet grass, counting animals, counting people, counting again because relief never trusts the first number. Maya sat on the curb with Isaiah's jacket around her shoulders, both hands wrapped around a paper cup of water Emily had brought her. She was shaking, but she was safe. Isaiah stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on Atlas's back. The dog had not left his side since coming out of the building. His white coat was streaked with soot at the chest and paws, but his posture was steady, almost solemn, as if he understood the weight of what had shifted. Blake Harlan stood several feet away, watching the firefighters move through the front doors. His clipboard was gone. The folder was gone. For the first time that morning, he looked like a man without a policy to hide behind. Richard Vale lingered near his sedan, phone in hand, speaking in a low voice to someone who was not there to see what everyone else had seen. But some truths do not need permission to become visible. One of the shelter security cameras had caught the lobby. Another had caught the side corridor. By noon, Emily had pulled the footage onto the office computer while the building aired out, and the animals settled in temporary runs behind the county rescue van. No one asked Atlas to go back into containment. No one reached for the red warning card. It still hung on the kennel door down the hall, useless now, a loud word that had met a quiet deed and lost. Inside Emily's office, the air smelled faintly of smoke, wet wool, and cooling coffee. Isaiah sat in the same chair as before, Maya beside him, her shoulder pressed against his arm. Atlas lay at his feet, not sleeping, just resting with his head across Isaiah's boot. Harlan stood behind the desk. Emily clicked play. The first footage showed the lobby filling with alarm light. It showed Isaiah losing his cane. It showed Atlas crossing through confusion, finding him, guiding him with the gentleness of a trained soul that had never forgotten its purpose. The second clip showed the side hallway, gray with haze, Maya at the jammed gate, Atlas pushing the crate aside and staying close until she reached the open door. No one spoke while it played. The truth did not need a narrator. When the screen went dark, Harlan slowly sat down. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I was wrong," he said. The words came out rough, as if they had cost him something. Isaiah turned his face toward him. "About what?" Harlan looked at Atlas. "About him." Emily folded her arms, but her eyes were soft. "That is a start." Harlan opened the public file, the thick one with red labels and cold summaries. For a moment, his hand hovered over the final review form. Then he tore it in half. The sound was small, paper giving way, but Maya smiled like she had heard a locked door open. Harlan reached for a blank evaluation sheet. "I am removing the dangerous classification pending a full review. Dr. Carter, I want the original training footage preserved and submitted with a corrected report. All of it." Richard Vale, standing in the doorway, lowered his phone. "Blake, you should think very carefully before making this emotional." Harlan did not look up. "I am thinking clearly for the first time today." Richard's expression hardened, but the room no longer bent around him. Emily lifted her chin. "The county investigator is already asking for the old records." Richard's silence changed shape. It became calculation, then retreat. He left without another word, his polished shoes clicking down the damp hallway, softer with every step until the front door closed behind him. Atlas lifted his head, listened, then laid it back across Isaiah's boot. Isaiah bent slowly, finding the dog's ears with his hand. His fingers moved through the thick white fur, pausing over the places where tension had lived for too long. They wrote the wrong story about you, boy, he whispered. Atlas exhaled, long and tired, the kind of breath a body releases when it stops bracing for the next blow life might bring. Maya leaned down and touched Atlas's shoulder. Can he come home with us? The question entered the room like sunlight. Emily looked at Isaiah. Harlan looked at the new form on his desk. Isaiah did not answer quickly. He listened to Atlas breathing. He listened to Maya waiting. He listened to his own heart, which had spent years telling him he was too broken to be needed. Then he nodded once. Not as a service dog, he said quietly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He smiled faintly, and there was something holy in how tired it was. As family. Emily blinked fast and turned toward the shelves as if searching for paperwork. Harlan cleared his throat. Maya wrapped both arms around Isaiah. Atlas rose then, slowly, and pressed his muzzle into the space between them, joining the embrace without asking. Outside, the clouds finally broke over Savannah. Light came through the office window, catching the white fur along Atlas's back until, for one brief second, he looked untouched by every name the world